They called it the mightiest armada in history, spread across the Mediterranean for the Allied invasion of Sicily, July 9, 1943. It was the period of World War II when taking of the large island which lies athwart the narrow waters separating North Africa and the toe of Italy would not only affirm Allied control of the Mediterranean, but would knock Italy right out of the war.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Axis History Podcast, where we bring you history unfiltered. Today, we are going to be discussing the Sicily campaign, otherwise known as Operation Husky, with none other than James Holland. Mr. Holland, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure, Nick. It really is.
Before we begin, James, I want to ask you some basic questions here, and that is, what led you to write the book Sicily 43, and what can we, as your readers, expect?
Yeah, that's a good question, Nick, and thanks for this. So I'm going to sort of go back a couple of stages because I started doing a lot of work on a kind of sort of 3-volume history of World War II in the West. And I've done volume 1 and volume 2, and actually I got up as far as I got to the kind of end of the Tunisian campaign in May 1943. So Sicily was due to be the start of volume 3. Then I got kind of distracted. I did a book on the air war called Big Week, which was all about the kind of sort of how the Allies kind of managed to kind of secure air superiority over the whole swathe of Northwest Europe as a kind of prerequisite for D-Day. And having done that, I then kind of thought, well, I've got to go on and do D-Day. So I then did D-Day and the Normandy campaign. But Sicily, it was always kind of sort of hovering in the background, and it's a place I actually know pretty well because way back when I started doing this series of fictional books. It's kind of like, I don't know whether American readers are familiar with Hornblower or Sharp or the Bernard Cornwell novels or anything like that. But the idea was to kind of sort of take a single fictional soldier and sort of take him through the Second World War. And they're just adventure books, and they're all kind of standalones and all the rest of it. Anyway, the 5th one was centered around Sicily. So I went over and I researched it and, kind of walked the ground and all that kind of stuff and boned up on it and wrote the book. And weirdly, coincidentally, around the same time, I got invited to come along on a battlefield study by the British Army. And British Army battlefield studies is something that I know the US Army does the same thing, but they go and kind of they take them pretty seriously. They're a chance for kind of units, organizations within the army to kind of get together, chew the cud, let their hair down, have a few beers, but also kind of think about history and their part and how history has kind of sort of enlightened them about today and all the rest of it. And, they often get a kind of academic along or specialist tour guide or whatever. Anyway, so I went along on this and it was just fascinating. It was just so interesting to do. One of the things we did on that one, we had a chance to do a recce beforehand with some pretty smart young officers. And I thought, God, this is just such a good story. And of course, at the time, Sicily was, it's front page news. It's just that in the narrative of World War II, it's been superseded by the events that followed, the invasion of Italy and particularly, of course, D-Day and Normandy and so on, and the battle in Northwest Europe. So it's just been kind of sort of consumed by later events, I think. But actually, it's fascinating because it's an island. It's got a very sort of clear start, middle, and end. It's also got some black marks about it because the last major work on it was by Carlo d'Este, who's a kind of, I seem to remember he got to colonel, I think, in the US Army. But anyway, he's a very eminent historian and stuff, but he was kind of rather down on the whole thing. He felt that the planning was woeful. He felt that, progress was too stodgy, particularly by 8th Army, the British side and Canadian side of things. He felt that kind of, the air power bit wasn't very good. The naval power was kind of a bit questionable. Airborne operations a complete fiasco. And at the end of it, kind of, 60,000 Italians and nearly 40,000 Germans got away, and that was unacceptable too. So, he kind of, it's kind of a bit of a black mark all around, really. He was quite critical of Allied efforts. And I kind of, I just have a completely the opposite view of that. And I thought, well, it's about time that people knew the story because like any aspect of World War II, it's kind of full of absolutely incredible human drama. But, just look at the tick box for this. Okay, so first of all, Ireland. It's the end of fascism and Mussolini. It's got the Mafia. It's got Lucky Luciano kind of tied up there in the sort of, the dark recesses somewhere in the background. It's got Patton. It's got Monty. It's got airborne operations. It's got dashing operations by special forces against kind of gun positions. It's got mad Germans. It's got Tiger tanks. It's got amazing aerial activity. It's got P-38 Lightnings. It's got Me-109s, it's got Spitfires, it's got battleships, it's got cruisers, it's got ducks and landing ships and lots of cool stuff and arguments and debates and discussions and a race for Messina, and a movie was made about it with George C. Scott. And, frankly, what's not to like? I mean, it's got literally everything. And I was amazed that there hasn't been a major narrative account of Sicily since Carlo D'Este's book, which was, I think, in 1988 or something like that. I mean, what's going on here? So, it felt like an obvious thing to do. That's a very long-winded answer to a very simple question.
Your enthusiasm about this and about history is inspiring, 100%.
Well, thank you. Well, I mean, it's heartfelt, to be honest, Nick. I mean, the bottom line is I find all this stuff just endlessly fascinating. I mean, the idea that, I look back at myself as my 20-year-old self, and what a feckless, useless individual I was. I could only see as far as my nose. And it was all about kind of the next party, girls, in my case, because I'm Brit playing cricket, and it's just, the idea that I could be in command of a tank squadron or a tank company or a pilot of a B-17 or something, you know what I mean? I mean, that's just absurd. So how is it that all these, these ordinary people kind of answered the call, did what they had to do, and went off and got caught up in this thing that's so extraordinary? And if you ever want any poignancy, I mean, you've only got to look at current climates, haven't you, with this kind of, the challenges we face with COVID now, and everyone's sort of getting a bit depressed about it. But, at least the young guys are surviving this one. Back in the war, all these guys are going off and going off to all corners of the globe. There's a reason why it's called the World War, from the South Pacific to the Arctic to Madagascar, to the jungles of Burma, to the deserts of North Africa, to kind of every literal corner of Europe and the European part of the Soviet Union. I mean, not mentioning the oceans. I mean, it's just incredible. And these guys are just kind of picked up and just spread everywhere. And so whatever you study, whatever you look at in World War II, it's just full of human drama. And what I want to know is, what was it like? And why did these guys do this? And what was their motivation? And how did those battles get fought? And why did they get fought in the way it did? And why were governments making decisions they made? And why this focus and not that focus? And so on. And all that stuff is just endlessly fascinating. And it really is a bottomless pit. So, it's not like, even the stuff that I've already done, I'm constantly kind of, when I go back to it, I kind of think, God, if only I'd put in, known that then when I was writing that book. And also the frustrating thing about writing books, and even more frustrating thing about making the TV programs, is that you're always just conscious you're just scraping the barrel here. It's just so that's what gets me. I just find it's really, really so interesting.
And now we approach the Sicily campaign itself, and I have to ask, why Sicily? And what did the Allies hope to achieve with the conquest of Sicily?
They decided that they were going to go to Sicily in January 1943 at the Casablanca Conference, which was a British and American, British and US chiefs of staff plus Roosevelt and Churchill. And this was a kind of, it was fairly clear that North Africa was going to be cleared of Axis forces one way or another, in pretty short order. And Eisenhower, who was at that point bumped up to Supreme Allied Commander, the first Supreme Allied Commander, kind of was put on the spot. And they said, when do you think Tunis is going to be over? And he went, well, I reckon kind of, middle of May. And as it turned out, he was bang on the money. So they said, okay, so what do we do next then? It was absolutely clear that the Allies were just not going to be able to mount a cross-channel invasion anytime in 1943. They just simply weren't ready at that stage for an operation of that enormity. But at the same time, you've got a large number of forces now in the Mediterranean. And, what are they going to do till the following May, which is when D-Day was supposed to happen, from a 1943 perspective? You've got all these people. You might as well kind of use them for something. And there's absolutely no question that psychologically to get a foothold in Europe would be a good thing. There's also no question that if they took Sicily, that would probably almost certainly be the death knell of Italy in the war. So that's that's them out of it. And, it's the first time that I think I'm right in saying it's the first time an American field army would be put into battle. in the Second World War, because, divisions and forces and amalgams were used elsewhere in the Pacific before then, but not an entire army. The Seventh Army went into being on the night of the 9th, 10th of July, 1943, just as they were invading. It became Seventh Army. To do something like Normandy, you need to test a few people first. You need to kind of work out your modus operandi. And that's not just about whether your generals are any good. That's about whether the whole system is any good, whether the whole operational level is good, as well as the kind of tactical and strategic. So, suddenly there's a kind of very, very, very good reasons for doing it. And that's why they do it. But actually, it's incredibly challenging because they're planning Sicily, which is no small operation. It is the world's largest amphibious operation ever mounted up to that point. And in terms of actually men dropped on D-Day and landed on D-Day, it is the biggest. It is even bigger than D-Day 11 months later in Normandy. So the difficulties are, how do you go about preparing for this when all your senior commanders are otherwise engaged with the Tunisian campaign, which is, not exactly small beer either?
You've mentioned briefly the high command. They're really focusing on the Tunisian campaign. And so my question is now, who were the men involved in the Allied high command in planning and executing this assault?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there is a sort of embryonic planning team back in the UK, but that's just kind of early doors. And the main planning team is with Allied Forces Headquarters, which is a small tri-service coalition planning team, American and British, based in the St. George's Hotel in Algiers. And in addition to that, all the separate kind of services have got their own planning teams as well. The problem is that the man who is kind of overall in charge of the ground forces is General Alexander, soon to become Field Marshal Alexander. And he is, he's got his hands full kind of being 18th Army Group commander in Tunisia. So yes, he's kind of on it, but he's also got other things to do, quite a lot of things to do. The same is true of Eisenhower, who is overall Supreme Allied Commander, but also he's got his eyes on the Tunisian campaign too. Ditto the same for Admiral Cunningham, who is overall Naval Commander, and ditto for the air commanders. Spots, Cunningham, Tedder, all of those guys. They've all got their hands full, kind of fighting the particular warfare that the battle that they're in at the moment. So that's not ideal, to be perfectly honest. However, there are also other complications in the whole planning team because, Sicily kind of looks like a flint head. It looks like a sort of old arrow flint head. And you've got one of the most important things when you have any kind of amphibious invasion is that you control the airspace at that time, or you certainly have superiority, if not total superiority. And how do you do this when you've got airfields at kind of either side and in the middle of the island? So the kind of air forces are kind of concerned that how they're going to capture these enemy airfields on Sicily. And so what they're all in favour of is landings in the west and in the southeast and kind of on the south as well, kind of basically everywhere. Whereas Montgomery, particularly, who's going to be commanding the kind of the main thrust, which is 8th Army, he wants to land in the southeast of Sicily because that's the closest to Messina. Messina is the key to Sicily because that's in the northeast of the island, and it's where the Straits of Messina are, and they're only kind of a mile or so across, and that's what links Sicily to the kind of the mainland, the main boot of Italy. So his point is, there's good beaches on the southeast coast. Catania is a big port that would be useful to capture quickly, which is sort of halfway up, and then that's the kind of closest route to Messina. You can't actually land up near Messina because Mount Etna's in that corner and there's no sandy beaches and, it's too far and it's too well protected and all the rest of it. It's too many guns and stuff. So the southeast seems the other obvious thing. But the air forces are kind of against that plan because that means, they can't, they're vulnerable from Axis airfields in the west. And so there is then this kind of further complication, which is that when 8th Army in Tunisia comes up to Infidaville in the kind of northeast corner of Tunisia, they come up against some pretty stiff opposition, mainly Italian troops. And this makes Montgomery think, well, hang on a minute. If the Italians are kind of fighting quite hard now, what are they going to be like when we get to Sicily? Now, odds are they're not going to be very good. But we can't really afford to take that risk because the one thing that overrules absolutely everything when you're planning an operation of this nature is that it doesn't fail. I mean, yes, obviously you want it to be a success, and you want it to be a quick success and completely wallop the enemy and kind of get to Messina in 3 minutes. But nothing trumps the need to make sure that it isn't a failure and that you're not kicked back into the sea, particularly when you're coming such huge distances. I mean, in the case of the kind of British Eighth Army, most of them are coming from Egypt, which is kind of 900 miles away, even from northern Tunisia and Algeria, several hundred miles away. Canadians are coming from Britain, which is kind of 2,000 miles away or something. So, the scale of it is just enormous, and there just can't be any cock-ups. So that makes Monty want to err on the side of caution, and it makes him want to put more infantry down than was originally going to be the plan. And there simply isn't the shipping to do everything. There isn't the shipping or the manpower to kind of land people at one end of the island and at the other. And at the same time, if you do that, you're not mutually supporting. So Monty suggests, he says, well, I need more men in the southeast, and persuades both Walter Bedell Smith, who is Eisenhower's chief of staff, and General Alexander, that actually the best thing would be to have the Americans landing on the central southern part of the island, and for the British and Canadians to land in the southeast and not worry about the west. And actually, that is the right decision. It just is. And this is meant as absolutely no offense to any Americans whatsoever. But first of all, most of Eighth Army is coming from Egypt, which is in the east. So it makes sense kind of, you're not going to have task force sort of swapping places mid-channel in the middle of the Mediterranean. They're in the east, so they should stay in the east. But secondly, they're just more experienced than the Americans at that stage. You've only had a US 2 Corps has been a part of British First Army in Tunisia, but it is only a corps. It hasn't fielded a field army before. And, it's largely untried. Patton hasn't commanded an army in the field at this time, whereas Monty does, and he's had, no small amount of success. So it makes sense that the British at this stage of the war and at this stage of the planning should take the kind of the lead in that operation. And as I say, that's absolutely no aspersions being cast on the Americans. That's just the way it is at that time. So that seems to me like the right decision. But putting boots on the ground comes at a cost to mechanization, because you can't have everything. If you absolutely filling your landing craft, your landing vessels to the gunwales with infantry, that means you can have less trucks, because you also need the fire support of artillery and tanks and all the rest of it, which means a lot of the infantry, if it's a walkover, if it's a cakewalk, once they get in, they're going to have to do a lot of walking. And that means the speed with which you can get up into the Catania plain, push on through, take Catania and get up to Messina is going to be challenged. And that's the price you pay for over caution. But my point is where that caution has been massively criticized, I would say it's right to be cautious, because if you've got all that material, you've got all that manpower, you've gone to all that effort, it cannot be a cock-up. It cannot fail. So you have to do, first priority is to make sure that everything is done to ensure that doesn't happen to the absolute best of your ability. And I think the plan they come up with deals with that. The other thing that is really interesting, though, is that the concerns about by the Air Force commanders actually prove completely invalid, because the Air Forces in the run-up to the Sicily invasion do a spectacularly fantastic job. And it's very interesting that while on the ground, the British still have the kind of edge over the Americans at this point, particularly in terms of both numbers and in terms of experience. The same is not the case for the Air Forces, because actually even by the end of the Tunisia campaign, there are more US Air Forces in theatre than there are British Commonwealth Air Forces in the RAF. And collectively, the Allied Air Forces just are phenomenal. They've got a number of tasks ahead. I mean, first of all, they've got to smash the Axis lines of communication. That means in Italy itself, all around Italy, all around Sicily, rather. They've got to hammer the Axis Air Forces, either on the ground or in the air, and they do that brilliantly. They've also then subsequently got to provide air support for the invasion fleet, and then close air support for the ground troops. And they do all those things really, really well. And what you see in that transition from the very end of the Tunisia campaign to the beginning, start, and middle of the Sicilian campaign is this new modern way of fighting, which is a harnessing of air, land, and sea power, kind of almost equally. And they're each mutually supporting one another. So, the naval forces are delivering most of the ground forces, but also giving them fire support as well. The air forces are giving support to the naval forces and to the ground forces. the ground forces are taking ground so that the air forces can then also occupy that ground with new airfields and all the rest of it. And so it goes in this circle, just going round and round and round and round. And that is unquestionably the most efficient way of using manpower, because that limits the number of boots you have to have on the ground. You're putting men, you're using steel, not flesh, as much as you possibly can. And you're harnessing the three facets of war in a much more effective way than if you're kind of very boots on the ground heavy fighting forces like the Soviet Union and the Germans and Italians, for example.
I mean, that's amazing. I mean, just thinking about the scale of that size. And that actually leads me to my next question real quick about the Allied side before I switch over to the Axis right now. And that is, you've touched on the large scale planning going into this and how this new warfare is developing, equal control, land, air, sea. My question is, would you do a quick number rundown of the Allied forces that are going to be hitting Sicily?
It's around 160,000 men being landed on D-Day, either dropped from the air or put on boots on the ground. That's about 5,000 more than D-Day in Normandy. It's I think it's about 2,700 vessels, something like that. That's completely off the top of my head, but so I may be a kind of 100 out or something. But it's that kind of mark. It's kind of 2,500, something like that, and 3,500 aircraft, which is a kind of a par with on parity with D-Day, the 11 months later. I mean that is huge numbers. I mean, really huge. So the big difference really with D-Day is less air forces and boots on the ground. It's naval forces, because you've got nearly 7,000 vessels in D-Day and you've got considerably less for Sicily. So that's the big change. But those are gargantuan numbers. I mean, I think 7th Army is about 207,000 men strong by the 15th of July. So that's kind of 5 days after D-Day. I mean, that's going some, without a major port. And that's one of the other big significant kind of lessons from Sicily is that the Allies realized that actually, do you know what? We got the kit to do this. I mean, the pier gets blown up at Gela, but who cares? Because they just put out a metal pontoon, and they put out several of them, and they've got landing ships which can kind of disgorge just vast amounts of material. 100 meters long, 100 yards long, draft of about 4 foot 8 inches. I mean, it's kind of nothing. It can take something like 18 Sherman tanks. 3,500 tons of supplies. I mean, 1,800 tons of supplies, something like that. I mean, these are big numbers. No, I've got that wrong. It's like 350 tons, I think, a landing ship. But anyway, that's kind of let's not kind of split hairs over kind of figures. I mean, it's serious, and you got the ducks as well. To kind of land that amount. And, I mean, within 5 days of landing, 7th Army have got a printing press up and running to make maps. They've got a water well, which is producing 25,000 gallons of water a day. It's this kind of stuff that kind of makes you think, okay, these guys mean business. They might be a bit, the Americans might be a little bit green in certain areas, but boy, if they got their kind of, if they got their stuff together, I mean, the logistics of it are just absolutely mind blowing. And there's a great line from the legendary Ernie Parr, one of the greatest war correspondents ever been. And he's at Licata and he's just watching this stuff. He's watching these ships, approaching Licata, these landing ships, all kind of sort of completely olive drab at the top of the massive guns and trucks and what have you on there, and just watching it all being disgorged with this just unbelievable proficiency. And he's saying, this is why we're going to win, because, this level of industrialization, this level of organization is just so impressive. How can anyone compete with this? And you know what? He's absolutely bang on the money, because they can't and they don't. I mean, it's just amazing. And to think that happens, that is 18 months after they started the war, when, and you think, everyone always assumes that the USA is kind of emerges sort of spontaneously as a kind of arsenal of democracy, kind of fully formed in December 1941. Well, it's not the case at all. It's been kind of 18 months before that of kind of, building the machine tools, training the workforce, building up the workforce, building more factories, kind of, getting the designs through and all the rest of it, getting those production lines going before they're in any position. And yet the army, which starts the Second World War, in September 1939, of kind of like 188,000 strong and 19th largest in the world, and pretty tiny by most world standards, already by, in just kind of 3 years has turned into this kind of enormous beast. I mean, it is exponential growth. And it's absolutely enormous. And, and I don't want to kind of sort of do down the efforts of the British either, because, in June 1940, they've got no army left, really. I mean, all their equipment's been left in Dunkirk. They've scuttled back across the English Channel after the defeat of France. And the whole point was that France did the army bit and that Britain did the naval and air power bit. Suddenly, they've got to create this much larger 55 division strong army out of nothing. And you know what they do? And by 1943, the middle of 1943, if you consider that kind of, the middle of 1940, just 3 years earlier, is kind of sort of ground zero, both for the US and for the British, in terms of, okay, right, we've got to completely kind of readdress what we thought we were going to have to do. And we've got to kind of start from scratch of a kind of blank sheet and build up our armed forces from literally nothing. That is unbelievable. I mean, really unbelievable. And one of my favorite photographs is of landing ships being loaded with Sherman tanks, I think at Bizerta or something like that in northern Tunisia, ready for Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily. And you just look at it and you go, wow, that's just phenomenal. I mean, it is growth of a level which is just truly unprecedented. And I think that when we're looking at the Allies in World War II, and I suppose especially the US, you have to look at them through the prism of what they achieved in that time, what they were like in kind of, what the US Armed Forces was like in kind of 1939, early 1940, and what it had become by kind of, 3.5 years later. I mean, it is really exceptional.
I'm going to flip sides here, and now we're going to talk Axis briefly, and that is, who were the men in command of defending Sicily, and especially in the high command, and what was their view of holding Sicily as a strategic position?
Yeah, so this is, the relationship between the Germans and the Italians is completely broken down at the highest level at this point. So, weirdly, Hitler has some sort of weird fondness for Mussolini, although it's not neutral at that stage at all. And so Hitler is kind of sort of simpatico with Mussolini. But next one's down, it's kind of absolutely broken down. So the chief of staff, the German chief of staff, the OKW, they just think that Italians have shot their bolt, which, as it turns out, they have. The Italian at the very top, they're working out how can we get out of this? How can we get out of this without catastrophic revenge from the Germans, without being completely destroyed by the Allies? We're between a rock and a hard place here. So that's what they're thinking. And then the next chain down, you've got actually, who's in command of Sicily and the Mediterranean. In case of the Germans, it's Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, who is the commander-in-chief of German forces in the south. You've got von Senger, who is the kind of sort of German general kind of liaison officer with the Italians. Italian Sixth Army under General Guzzoni is overall in charge of Italian forces on Sicily, but there's a few kind of naval forces which are kind of out of his remit. These naval fortresses in inverted commas, which are kind of sort of protecting the key ports of Palermo, Catania, Messina, and so on, and Syracuse and Augusta. But it's an absolute mess, and there's also a kind of complete divergence over strategy. So Mussolini is nervous about having, because he feels that kind of the end is nigh, he's nervous about having too many German troops in Italy. So he kind of says, I'd rather not have German troops, but can you just send me lots of kit? How about some tanks and guns and, supplies and all this kind of stuff? But I don't really want German troops, but the Germans send in divisions anyway. So there are a whole load of reserve divisions in Italy, kind of sort of, and they want to send more, which is a cause of kind of tension. It ends up being 2 divisions of German troops on Sicily itself, both of which are kind of reconstituted. So it's the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division, which had been the 15th Panzer Division of North Africa, which completely destroyed the end of Tunisia. So that's been kind of rebuilt. Then there's the Hermann Goering Division, the Hermann Goering Regiment had been in Tunisia, largely put in the bag. So that is being rebuilt as well. So there are some good experience in there, and there's some very, very competent men within both those divisions, but there are also lots of inexperienced men too. Paul Conrat, who is the commander of the Hermann Goering Division, is not particularly experienced and doesn't really know what he's doing. But, the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division is pretty well led. It's not bad at all. So they're kind of a bit of a mixed bag. And also there's a part of the Hermann Goering Division called Brigade Schmalz. Wilhelm Schmalz is just superlatively good. So he is one of the major commanders of the Hermann Goering, and he's one of the good ones. And under him, he's trained them up, the men, he's got them organized, and they know what they're about. And so they're just a totally different kettle of fish to the other half of the Hermann Goering division, which are frankly a bit crud. So it's a really mixed match. German troops about 60,000, Italian troops, Sicilian troops about 200,000. But Sicilian troops their bolt is shot. And the Sicilian troops are not interested in fighting at all. But of course, all during the planning of this, the Allies have no idea how many German troops it's going to be. They don't know what the quality of the Sicilian troops is going to be. They don't know that they've shot their bolt at that point. They can suspect it, but they don't know. There's also divergence of where the Allies are going to attack. And Hitler always views things through his own prism. So if he thinks that the place that he's most worried about is the Balkans, because that's close to Romania, and Romania is the only source of real oil that the Germans have. So for him, that is where the Allies are going to attack, because if he was the Allies, that's where he would attack himself. But of course, it completely ignores the fact that the Balkans and indeed Greece are way beyond fighter cover, and you need to have fighter cover over your invasion force. So it's just insane to think that they're going to land in Greece or somewhere like that, because there simply isn't the infrastructure to allow it. There aren't the beaches, there isn't the road system. Most importantly, they're just not within range of fighter cover. So the only places that are within range of fighter cover are Sicily or Sardinia, and Sardinia is absolutely pushing it. And as a stepping stone, Sardinia makes less sense than Sicily, because of course it's further away from Allied supply bases. You've still got Sicily in the way. So anyone with any sense recognizes that Sicily is the most likely bet. But because of Hitler's insistence that it's not going to be, Sicily is not reinforced to the level that it needs to be, which is a kind of massive tick for the Allies, but a big black mark for the Axis. But most of the Italian senior commanders, plus Kesselring, plus all the major military commanders on the ground in Sicily, all think that it's going to be Sicily. And that's because it's the most obvious place, and because that's indeed exactly where it's going to be. So all those kind of, fantastical deception plans by the British about sort of dropping dead people in the Mediterranean, fake identities and all the rest of it, it's just doesn't make the slightest bit of difference, because all it does is confirm what Hitler already believes, and it doesn't dissuade Mussolini or Kesselring or any of the other senior figures.
So now we come to the actual campaign itself. It hits, it goes. Let's ask this question here. How long did this campaign last? And more importantly, how did it begin, and what was the order of battle when it came to this campaign?
Yeah, so it lasted 38 days. And for anyone who's been lucky enough to be in Sicily and stand in the middle of the Catania Plain, or stand at the top of Troina or Rizzoro or any of these other brutal individual battles within the bigger campaign on these mountaintop hills, you would have to say that 38 days to clear the island was pretty damn good going. As it turned out, the invasion itself went a lot better than anyone could have ever dared hope. For the British and Canadians, it was absolute cakewalk. I mean, the Sicilian defenders just gave up in droves. One of the most heavily defended areas of European coastline was around Augusta and Syracuse, and the Italians just kind of scarpered in panic before a shot was barely fired. So, that was a complete kind of own goal and a gimme to the Allies. The Americans actually had a much tougher time. Their main three landing beaches were Licata, Gela in the middle, and Goliati in the a little bit further down. And at Skeleti and at Licata, it was pretty easy going, but at Gela, they had quite a tough fight. And actually, the following day, D+1, the Axis forces counterattacked quite strongly. So as part of the Hermann Goering division, supported by the Livorno division, which was an Italian infantry division. And actually, they didn't, the Axis forces were not good enough at all. They were not coordinated enough, and their inexperience showed, frankly. But it certainly gave the Americans, a headache. But they fought back brilliantly and saw it off. And thereafter, in the west of the island, it was pretty plain sailing for the Americans, to be perfectly honest. And for the British particularly, and the Canadians, as they were advancing up in the north-southeast, it became tougher and tougher and tougher, not least because suddenly the better German forces managed to kind of sort of regain their balance, and they kind of fell back to what was called the Hauptkampflinie, which is kind of basically the main line of defense. And this had been prepared readily prepared by Schmalz, Wilhelm Schmalz, who I'd kind of sort of mentioned earlier on. So there were defences on the kind of northern side of the Catania Plain, using the foothills of the of Mount Etna to look over the plain and kind of mark off anything that moved in that area, which made it very difficult for the Allies to get across, for the British to get across, and reinforcing all these kind of this sort of line of mountaintop hills, towns, which were kind of made them a very, very tough nut to crack indeed. So, to cut a long story short, Patton's Seventh Army kind of moved west, cleared that pretty quickly because it was mainly just Italian troops who weren't really interested in fighting, and then turned up to the north, and suddenly you've got this kind of sort of this sort of half circle, a third of a circle, a quarter of a circle in the northeast of Sicily, kind of hammering against a kind of pretty strong German defensive line. And it turns into kind of sort of very, very brutal, bitter fighting. And the reason that the British aren't able to kind of bludgeon their way through the Catania Plain quickly before the Germans regain their balance is because they're too slow. And that's because the infantry are having to move on foot, largely on foot, because of that kind of front loading of the infantry in the initial invasion, which in retrospect they needn't have done. But even so, because of the kind of threat of failure, was probably the right decision.
Now let's talk about the inevitable of this campaign. Let's actually talk about casualties. What are the casualties like for the Allies and the Axis overall?
Yeah, so in terms of numbers dead, it's not that high for the Allies, and casualties are a lot worse, and half the casualties are through malaria, but which was absolutely rampant. But also you got to understand that the Allies are fighting a very kind of with a very long tail. So the number of troops that are actually doing the fighting are a comparatively small proportion of the overall forces that are there, because the Allied way of war is to kind of put so much emphasis on that long tail and supply and logistics and all the rest of it. About 40%, 44%, something like that, are supply troops. I think infantry only amounts to about kind of 14 or 15%, armor about 8%, 7-8%. So, artillery I think is about 18%, something like that. So those infantry units, those frontline infantry units and armored units that are in the absolute kind of spearhead, they're getting absolutely hammered and devastated. So it's not really so much about the kind of overall figures, it's about the percentage casualties of those frontline units, and that's pretty high, certainly on the Allied side, and it's obviously worse on the Axis side because they're in defeat and losing. Overall casualties: 4,678 German dead, further 4,583 missing, which is basically dead. The Italians, 4,325 dead and 40,655 missing. Most of those are Sicilians who've just gone home. British and Canadian dead, 2,721. Americans, 2,811. But this works out as 237 Axis troops and 146 Allied troops killed every single day. Now, that might not sound like quite a lot, but that is a heck of a lot when you consider that, 237 troops, that's almost 2 companies. 146 troops is more than 1 company, out of a 4-company strong battalion. So that's and accumulatively, that is a lot.
No, that's very true. And I think it's one thing you pointed out, when you look at overall numbers, it doesn't seem like a lot. But if you look at it from a unit perspective, like for anyone who's watched Band of Brothers or the Pacific, you see what those individual casualties mean for those units. And really, that's just catastrophic when you think about it. Wow.
Yeah. And what is also really interesting is that disparity of troops is not so great when you're talking about frontline infantry units. I mean, the Axis troops are operating with a much, much shorter tail, much less support troops than the Allied troops are. Now, the Allied forces are much better for that. I mean, it makes absolute sense to make sure that your frontline troops are really, really well supplied and everything. But in terms of kind of head-to-head, it's certainly not parity or anything like that, but it is absolutely brutal. And let me give you the example of Troina, which is one of the sort of great epics of the Americans and Germans fight during the campaign. From the kind of beginning of August to the 6th of August, 1943. And you just got to imagine what it's like being in those infantry units, because this is the highest town in Sicily. It's on a kind of weird sort of folding hills on a kind of sort of mountain plain at the top of a mountain. So you're really high up, but you've got your own little kind of it's its own little sort of community, all of its own up there. And the Germans have got OPs, observation posts on every single bit of high ground, and they've got mortars and machine guns and lots of machine guns, and behind them they've got artillery. Now the Americans have got more, but they're not having to take the land. They're not having to defend, like the Germans are. They're having to take this land. So how do you get up one of these hills and take it? Well, yes, you chuck down lots of shells and you smother the enemy positions, but you've still got to have the infantry to kind of get off their asses and get up and climb up that high ground and take those machine gun posts and take those mortar positions and all the rest of it. And just say you're kind of, say you're operating, if you're a battalion attack or a 2-battalion attack, but there's 900 men in a battalion, but you would leave 10% out of battle. So let's call that 840. You wouldn't have all 4 companies up front. So you'd only have 3. So let's, that means you're talking about kind of 400, 500, 550 men, something like that. Each company is split into platoons. They're then split into squads. A squad of 10 men might be advancing. A single mortar round might take out 7 of those men just in one go, because up there the soil is really, really thin. So when a shell explodes, lots of shards of rock also get, hurtle around with lethal splinters. And, you might have 2 dead, 5 wounded, one of those wounded really badly, but you've only got 3 standing after that one mortar shell lands. No, that's not going to happen all the time, but you can see how accumulatively, as you're advancing over ground, that is more and more likely. So you get yourself in a situation where certain infantry companies are down to 15 men after kind of 4 days of fighting or 3 days of fighting or whatever it might be. And that means they can no longer function. There's just nothing left. It's been utterly devastated until you can kind of pause, regroup, the kind of replacement troops come in, and you start all over again. So casualty figures really need that context. So that is why it takes so long, because what happens is you send your infantry up, you hammer the enemy with your artillery and close air support and all the rest of it. Close air support is not terribly accurate at this stage of the war. You do your best. There's lots of smoke. You can't really see diddly squat. Then you send out your infantry. They fail to take their objective, because what happens is one squad is down to 3 men. Another one is down to 4. Another one is down to kind of 7, and suddenly everyone's thinking, well, I don't really want to do this anymore. This is just suicide. So you go to ground, quite understandably, and until you can kind of just grind down and attrit your enemy to a point where their resistance is kind of next to nothing, you're not going to be able to get your infantry to go forward. And that's not because they're not brave or anything like that. It's just because physically they're going to be decimated if they try. So then you've got to go in for a kind of a longer assault, and you've got to fire over yet more shells, and you've got to send over way more shells than the enemy is sending over to you. So it just turns into this horrible slogging match, and that's why it takes so long. And anyone who goes, well, the Allies are a bit sluggish, they're a bit slow, they didn't quite have the kind of tactical flair of the Germans. I just think they are talking absolutely out of their jacksie, because they weren't there and they don't have to fight it. And it's all very well being an armchair general back home, in your study with your kind of bookshelves and all the rest of it. But the reality of fighting in those conditions is just unbelievably brutal. And the only way to do it is just to kind of hurtle over more ordnance than the enemy do, and grind them down. And you can completely understand, when you're standing on those hills overlooking Troina, you totally get why it takes 6 days to kind of reduce this lonely outcrop in the middle of Sicily. And that is being repeated over and over and over again in Sicily at Azoro, at Regalbuto, at Agira, at Centeripe, at Nicosia, at Randazzo, and so on and so forth. Well, less so than Randazzo, actually, which ends up being a cakewalk. But over and over and over again, it's the same story. And it's just about grinding down, overwhelming the enemy, pushing forward with the hapless infantry, the infantry kind of hoping they don't take too many casualties and going on to the next one. And it's a really, really tough campaign. And in brutal heat. I mean, brutal heat. I mean, it is, putting a tin helmet on your head in kind of 40 degrees is just like putting your head in an oven. I mean, it's just saps the energy. Lots of people dropping malaria as well, so that's further undermining your ability to attack and operate and all the rest of it. Again, I say it, to win Sicily in 38 days is amazing.
Over the past 77 years since the 43 campaign, how much would you say that historiography has changed the way we view the battle for Sicily? Why has it changed? And are there any new insights?
Yeah, well, I think the kind of the Carlo d'Este view was sort of shaped kind of pretty much at the time, where there was this sense of, at the end of the Sicilian campaign, that somehow they'd let too many Axis troops away, which I think is really, I think is the Allies kind of beating themselves up unnecessarily. I mean, if you look at evacuations, so 39,700 or whatever it is, I think it's 39,699 German troops get away, and some 60,000 Italian troops get away. And of those 39,699, about 25,000 are fighting troops. So that's somehow less than two divisions. Two divisions makes absolutely no impact on the subsequent Italian campaign that follows at all. So, and if you look at evacuations in World War II, they're nearly always successful. From Dunkirk through to the evacuation of Crete or Greece by the British, through to the evacuation of East Prussia by the Germans at the end of the Second World War with the Red Army bearing down on them. They still managed to get kind of 2 million Germans away, civilians and troops and stuff. So they are generally pretty successful. And I think that needs to be borne in mind when you're thinking about Sicily. But I think the other thing about it is that what it also is colouring what happens in Sicily and the success of the Sicilian campaign is what subsequently happens in Italy, where it is expected to be another cakewalk. Enigma traffic, kind of decrypts of Enigma German codes, coded radio traffic suggests that Hitler's going to retreat to the Pisa-Rimini line, which is way north of Rome, and they think it's going to be an easy victory. And that isn't the case. Hitler changes his mind, decides to fight for every yard, and then the weather kicks in, and it's not like it was when they were planning Italy in the summer of 1943, where it's absolutely scorchio and boiling hot, and it's lemon groves and palm trees and all the rest of it in the twinkly Mediterranean. By the winter of 1943, it's absolutely brutal in Italy. The snow's falling, the rain's falling. It's horrible. Supplies have gone mainly to the air forces at the Foggia airfield, so the armies have been second in the kind of priority list, and so the whole thing has sort of grind to a halt. And people just go, well, if we hadn't let those two divisions of Germans escape in Sicily and all the rest of it. So suddenly it's got this kind of narrative of a kind of bit of a black mark. And then all Carlo d'Este is doing is kind of reinforcing that when he comes to his big narrative. Whereas with the passage of time, you can look at this stuff in a kind of slightly wider context, and you can see the kind of bigger picture because we know what happened in Italy later. We kind of, stand back a little bit. And I think the other thing is, I think in the narrative of World War II, the three levels of war, the strategic, tactical, and operational. Tactical, obviously, is the kind of cold face of war. That's the fighting. The strategic is obviously the kind of main aims and all the rest of it. But the operational level often gets left out of the narrative. It's kind of played lip service only. But actually, the operational level is key to understanding the whole thing because it's why armies are constructed in the way they are, or fighting forces are constructed in the way they are, and it's how armies operate. And when you understand that, and you understand what the Allies are doing, this kind of whole steel not flesh policy, this idea of no more retreats, of kind of only going forward, that kind of more methodical approach, not only saves lives, but it's kind of much more understandable. It's also about morale. You've got conscript armies. You can't keep kind of taking land and then conceding it again. So whenever you attack, you want to make sure that you've got all the supplies you need to make sure that attack wins. To me, that just makes good sense. But that's kind of that's part of a kind of new appraisal of the Second World War. whereas previous historians, I think, have been far more critical of the Allied efforts than I am.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today for Sicily 43 on the Axis History podcast with none other than the awesome James Holland. James, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Oh, Nick, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And to our listeners, definitely check out the links below. I'm going to provide various links to not only where you can learn more about the Sicily campaign, but I'm also going to provide a link to the book. Get it when you can, read it, and enjoy the awesome insights that Mr. Holland has to offer, because he doesn't just write in a way to where you learn history. He writes in a way so you can almost experience it for yourself. And if you have the imagination, reading his work is like you are actually there. And honestly, I cannot recommend his work enough. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much, and have a wonderful day.